My name is Emma Richardson, and I'm 34 years old. 6 months ago, my husband Michael packed 2 suitcases, kissed our 8-year-old son Tyler goodbye, and moved to Munich, Germany with his mistress. He told me it was a temporary business opportunity, that he'd be back in 3 months, that this would secure our family's future. What he didn't tell me was that Sabrina Weber, his so-called business partner, had been sharing more than just marketing strategies with him for the past year. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning I discovered their relationship, I was picking Tyler up from soccer practice when Michael's phone, which he'd forgotten on the kitchen counter, buzzed with a message that shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. But that betrayal was nothing compared to what happened when he returned last Tuesday, standing on our doorstep with flowers and promises, acting as if 6 months of abandonment could be erased with a smile and an apology. The funny thing about perfect marriages is how quickly you realize they were never perfect at all. Looking back now, I can see the cracks that had been forming for years, the small betrayals that paved the way for the big one. But when you're living inside it, when you're busy making school lunches and managing work deadlines and trying to keep everyone happy, those cracks just look like normal marriage stuff. The kind of thing you tell yourself every couple goes through. Michael and I met in college at the University of Texas. I was studying communications with a focus on marketing, and he was deep into computer science, already talking about starting his own software company before he'd even graduated. There was something magnetic about his ambition back then, the way he could paint a picture of our future that made everything seem possible. He'd talk about the house we'd buy, the trips we'd take, the life we'd build together, and I could see it all so clearly. He made me believe I was essential to that vision, that his success would be our success, that we were a team destined for something special. We got married 2 years after graduation in a small ceremony at my mother's church in Lakeway. Nothing fancy, but it felt right. Michael was 24 and already working at a tech startup downtown, while I'd landed my first marketing job at a small agency. We rented a tiny apartment near campus and spent our evenings planning our future empire. Michael would code late into the night while I worked on building my portfolio, and we'd meet in the kitchen around midnight to share whatever leftovers we could find and dream about the day when his software would change the world. Tyler came along 3 years later, a beautiful surprise that shifted everything. Michael initially panicked about the timing, worried that a baby would derail his entrepreneurial plans. But the moment he held Tyler in the hospital, something changed in him. He became this incredibly devoted father, the kind of dad who would get up for every midnight feeding just so I could rest, who would spend hours on the floor building elaborate block towers that Tyler would gleefully knock down. Those early years with Tyler were some of the happiest of our marriage. We were tired constantly, living on coffee and determination, but we were united in the shared purpose of raising this incredible little human we'd created together. When Tyler turned 2, Michael finally took the leap and started Innovate Soft with his college friend David Torres. They'd been talking about it for years, developing software solutions for small businesses, and they finally had enough savings and client interest to make it real. I remember the night he came home with the incorporation papers, how proud he looked, how certain he was that this was our moment. I supported him completely, taking on more responsibilities at TechFlow Marketing so he could focus on building the company. We had a plan where I'd maintain steady income and benefits while he got the business off the ground, and then eventually I'd join him once things stabilized. The first 2 years of Innovate Soft were brutal. Michael worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. There were months when they barely made payroll, when we had to dip into our savings just to keep the lights on. But slowly, steadily, things started to improve. They landed their first major client, then a second, then a third. By Tyler's 5th birthday, the company was profitable and growing. Michael hired his first employees, moved into a real office space, started talking about expansion opportunities. That's when Sabrina Weber entered our lives, though I didn't realize it at the time. Michael mentioned her casually one evening over dinner, explaining that Innovate Soft was exploring partnerships with European companies to expand their market reach. Sabrina worked for a marketing firm in Munich that specialized in helping American tech companies establish themselves in Germany. She was smart, Michael said. really understood the European market in ways that could be valuable for their growth strategy. She'd be coming to Austin for a week-long series of meetings to discuss potential collaboration. I remember being excited about it. After years of Michael working primarily with David and a small team of local developers, the idea of international partnerships felt like validation that the company was really succeeding. I suggested we have Sabrina over for dinner one night during her visit, thinking it would be nice to show some Texas hospitality and maybe learn more about German business culture. Michael seemed hesitant at first, saying he didn't want to impose on family time but eventually agreed. Sabrina was not what I expected. I'd imagined someone older, more formal, maybe wearing conservative business suits and speaking with a thick accent. Instead, she was 28, strikingly beautiful, with perfectly styled blonde hair and an easy confidence that filled whatever room she entered. Her English was flawless, with just a hint of an accent that somehow made everything she said sound more sophisticated. She brought expensive wine, and preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Flowers for me, played soccer in the backyard with Tyler, and spent the evening asking thoughtful questions about Austin and American culture. I liked her immediately, which makes what happened next so much more painful. She seemed genuinely interested in our family, complimenting our home, asking about Tyler's school and my work at TechFlow. When she learned I was in marketing, her face lit up with enthusiasm. She started talking about potential synergies between our companies, ways we might collaborate on campaigns targeting American businesses expanding into Europe. By the end of the evening, I felt like we'd made a real connection, both personally and professionally. Michael was different around Sabrina, more animated than I'd seen him in months. He laughed louder at her stories, leaned in closer when she spoke, seemed energized in a way that reminded me of those early days when he was first starting the company. I told myself it was just excitement about the business opportunity, the thrill of potentially expanding into international markets. Looking back, I can see how naive that was. But at the time, it felt like evidence that our sacrifices were finally paying off. The collaboration between Innovate Soft and Sabrina's firm, Weber Marketing Solutions, developed quickly. Within 2 months of her initial visit, they'd signed a partnership agreement that would have Sabrina spending 2 weeks every month in Austin, working directly with Michael and David to develop their European strategy. The other 2 weeks, Michael would communicate with her virtually, participating in video calls at odd hours to accommodate the time difference. Those video calls started innocuously enough. I'd walk past Michael's home office around 10 at night and see him hunched over his laptop, speaking quietly in the blue glow of the screen. When I asked about it the next morning, he'd explain that they were working on proposals for German clients, that the time difference made evening calls necessary. It made sense logically, so I didn't think much of it beyond occasionally bringing him coffee or reminding him not to stay up too late. The changes in Michael were gradual at first. He started paying more attention to his appearance, buying new clothes, and getting his hair cut more frequently. He joined a gym and began working out religiously, something he'd never shown much interest in before. When I complimented his new energy, he credited it to the excitement of expanding the business, the motivation that came from seeing real growth potential. He talked about how working with Sabrina had opened his eyes to possibilities he'd never considered, how her European perspective was challenging him to think bigger. I was genuinely happy for him. After years of watching him struggle to build the company, seeing him energized and optimistic felt like a gift. Tyler noticed the change too, commenting that Daddy seemed more fun lately, more willing to play catch in the backyard or help with homework. For a few months, it felt like we were entering a new phase of our marriage, one where the financial stress was lifting and we could focus on enjoying the life we'd worked so hard to build. The first real warning sign came during one of Sabrina's visits to Austin. I'd offered to take her to lunch, thinking it would be nice to spend some time together outside of business meetings. She seemed surprised by the invitation, almost uncomfortable, and made several excuses before finally agreeing to meet at a cafe downtown. Throughout the lunch, she kept checking her phone and seemed distracted. When I asked about her life in Munich, whether she had family or a boyfriend there, she gave vague answers and quickly steered the conversation back to work topics. What struck me most was how different she seemed from the warm, engaging woman who'd had dinner at our house months earlier. This version of Sabrina was polite but distant, Professional but not personal. When I mentioned that Michael had been working such long hours on their European project, she looked genuinely confused for a moment before covering it with a smile and saying something about the demands of international business. That evening, I mentioned to Michael that Sabrina had seemed different during our lunch, more reserved than usual. His reaction was immediate and defensive. He accused me of being territorial, of not understanding the pressure she was under to deliver results for her German clients. He said I was reading too much into normal professional behavior, that not everyone was as naturally social as I was. The intensity of his response caught me off guard. We'd been together for over 10 years, and I'd never seen him get so protective about a business relationship. The late-night video calls became more frequent, sometimes lasting until 2 or 3 in the morning. Michael explained that they were working on a major proposal for a consortium of German companies, that the time-sensitive nature of the project required these extended sessions. He started closing his office door during these calls, something he'd never done before. When I asked about it, he said the house was too noisy in the evenings, that he needed complete quiet to focus on the technical details they were discussing. Tyler started asking why Daddy was always working in his office with the door closed, why he couldn't come in and say goodnight anymore. I made excuses about important business calls, but I could see the confusion in my son's eyes. Michael had always been an accessible father, the kind of dad who would drop everything to help with a science project or read bedtime stories. This new version of Michael, locked away in his office speaking in hushed tones, was foreign to both of us. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in March. Michael had left early for a breakfast meeting with potential investors, forgetting his phone on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker. I was getting Tyler ready for school when the phone buzzed with a text message. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen, expecting to see something work-related that I might need to pass along. Instead, I saw a message from Sabrina that made my stomach drop. The text was in German, but even with my limited high school language skills, I could make out enough to understand. There were words I recognized like Liebe and Vermisstich, and more importantly, there were heart emojis, and the kind of affectionate tone that had no place in a professional relationship. My hands were shaking as I used my phone to translate the message through an app. The English version was even worse than I'd feared. Sabrina was telling Michael how much she missed him, how she couldn't wait for their next private meeting, how difficult it was to pretend they were just business partners when other people were around. She referenced specific moments they'd shared, intimate details that made it clear their relationship had been physical for months. I sat at our kitchen table, staring at this evidence of my husband's betrayal, while Tyler finished his cereal and chattered about a math test he had that day. The normalcy of the morning felt surreal against the backdrop of my marriage falling apart in real time. I took screenshots of the message, my mind racing through all the signs I'd missed, all the explanations I'd accepted without question. When Michael returned from his meeting an hour later, I was waiting for him with his phone in my hand. The look on his face when he saw it there told me everything I needed to know. He didn't even try to deny it at first, just stood in our doorway looking defeated and guilty. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Emma, I can explain." But there was no explanation that could undo what I'd discovered, no words that could rebuild the trust that had just been shattered completely. The man I'd loved for over a decade, the father of my child, the person I'd built my entire adult life around, had been living a lie for months while I made excuses for his behavior and supported his success. That conversation lasted for hours, through Tyler's school day and into the evening. Michael alternately apologized and defended himself, claiming the relationship with Sabrina had started as friendship but developed into something more, that he'd never meant for it to happen, that he was confused about his feelings but still loved me and Tyler. He swore it was just an emotional affair, that nothing physical had happened, but the translated messages I'd seen made it clear that wasn't true. The most devastating part wasn't just the infidelity itself, but the realization that so many moments I'd treasured over the past year had been contaminated by his deception. The new energy I'd celebrated in him, the excitement about the business, the late nights I'd respected as dedication to our family's future, all of it had been about another woman. I'd been supporting and encouraging my husband's affair without even knowing it. Michael begged for forgiveness, promised to end things with Sabrina immediately. swore he would do whatever it took to save our marriage. He painted the affair as a temporary mistake, a midlife crisis that meant nothing compared to what we'd built together. He talked about couples therapy, about taking time off work to focus on us, about proving that I was the only woman he truly wanted to be with. For a brief moment, I considered it. 10 years of marriage, a child together, a life we'd built from nothing. All of that history weighed heavily against one betrayal, however devastating. But then I thought about Tyler, about what kind of example we'd be setting, about whether I could ever trust Michael again after such an elaborate deception. I thought about the months ahead, constantly wondering if he was really working late or meeting Sabrina, checking his phone, living in a state of perpetual suspicion. That night, after Michael had moved into the guest room and Tyler was asleep, I called my best friend Lisa. She came over immediately, bringing wine and tissues, and the kind of practical support that only comes from 20 years of friendship. Lisa had been through her own divorce 3 years earlier, so she understood the unique combination of grief and relief that comes with acknowledging a marriage is over. "You don't have to make any permanent decisions tonight," she told me as we sat on my living room couch surrounded by the remnants of the life I'd thought I was living just that morning. "But you also don't have to pretend this didn't happen just because it's complicated." She was right, of course. The affair had fundamentally changed everything, not just between Michael and me, but in how I saw myself and what I was willing to accept. The woman who woke up that Tuesday morning, trusting and supportive and focused on building a future with her husband, was gone. In her place was someone who'd been forced to confront the reality that love and commitment weren't enough to guarantee faithfulness, that the person you trust most in the world can maintain an elaborate deception while looking you in the eye every day. Michael left for Germany 2 weeks later. The decision to let Michael go to Germany felt like the most mature thing I could do at the time. After the discovery of his affair with Sabrina, we'd spent 2 weeks in this strange limbo, where we were living in the same house but existing in completely different realities. Michael was desperate to prove his commitment to our marriage, bringing me flowers every day, writing long letters about his mistakes, trying to recreate the romantic gestures from our early relationship. But every kind word felt hollow. Every touch felt contaminated by the knowledge of where his hands had been. Every promise felt like another potential lie. Tyler was struggling too, though he didn't understand why. 8-year-olds don't need to know the details of adult betrayals, but they feel the tension in every room, the way conversations stop when they enter, the forced smiles that don't reach anyone's eyes. He started having nightmares about monsters in his closet, which broke my heart, because the real monster was sitting at our breakfast table every morning, asking about homework and soccer practice like nothing had changed. Dr. Patricia Morales, the marriage counselor we'd started seeing, suggested that maybe some physical separation could give us both the space we needed to figure out what we actually wanted. Michael seized on the idea immediately, proposing that the Germany expansion project could serve as a natural trial separation. He could spend 3 months in Munich, working intensively with the European clients, while I had time to heal and decide whether I wanted to fight for our marriage. The plan sounded reasonable on paper. InnovateSoft really did need someone in Germany to manage their growing European client base, and David Torres couldn't leave Austin because his wife was expecting their second child. Michael painted it as a chance to prove himself to me, to show that he could prioritize our marriage over his relationship with Sabrina. He swore he would cut all personal contact with her, limit their interactions to strictly professional communications, and use the time away to reflect on what he'd almost lost. I wanted to believe him so desperately. Despite everything, I still loved the man I'd married, the father who built elaborate blanket forts with Tyler on Sunday mornings and remembered every detail of my workday stress. The affair felt like a temporary insanity, a midlife crisis that had spiraled out of control rather than a fundamental character flaw. If 3 months apart could help us rebuild our foundation, if Michael could prove that our family meant more to him than whatever excitement Sabrina represented, maybe we could find our way back to each other. The night before Michael left for Germany, we sat on our back porch after Tyler had gone to bed, sharing a bottle of wine and talking more honestly than we had in months. Michael cried as he talked about how sorry he was, how he'd gotten caught up in the thrill of the new business opportunities and lost sight of what really mattered. He talked about feeling like he'd been living someone else's life for the past year, making decisions that didn't align with his values or his love for our family. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he said, reaching for my hand across the small patio table we'd bought together 5 years earlier. "But if you can give me these 3 months to prove that I'm still the man you married, I swear I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you and Tyler." I let him hold my hand, feeling the familiar calluses on his fingers from years of typing code late into the night. This was the same hand that had held mine during Tyler's birth, that had rubbed my back during countless nights when work stress kept me awake, that had worn the wedding ring I'd placed there 10 years ago with such hope and certainty. Maybe that history was worth fighting for. Michael's departure was surprisingly emotional for all of us. Tyler clung to his father at the airport, making Michael promise to call every day and bring back something special from Germany. I hugged Michael goodbye, and for a moment it felt like we were just a normal family saying temporary farewells, like he was going on a business trip instead of fleeing the wreckage of our marriage. When his plane taxied away from the gate, Tyler waved frantically through the terminal window, and I felt this unexpected surge of hope that maybe we really could find our way back to each other. The first week after Michael left was actually liberating. Without the constant tension of trying to pretend everything was normal, Tyler and I fell into new routines that felt surprisingly comfortable. We had breakfast together every morning without the awkward silences that had become standard when Michael was there. Tyler seemed more relaxed, more willing to talk about school and friends, without the worry that he might say something that would upset the delicate emotional balance of our household. I threw myself into work with renewed energy, taking on projects at TechFlow that I'd been too distracted to pursue properly. My supervisor, Amanda Martinez, commented on how focused I seemed, how my creative energy was back after months of seeming stressed and scattered. I didn't tell her about the separation, but I think she sensed that something significant had shifted in my personal life. For the first time in over a year, I felt like myself again, like Emma Richardson, rather than just Michael's wife and Tyler's mother. Michael called religiously every evening, timing his calls to catch Tyler before bedtime and me after dinner. Those conversations became the highlight of Tyler's day. Michael would ask detailed questions about soccer practice, help with homework over video chat, and tell elaborate stories about German culture and the funny differences he was discovering between American and European business practices. Tyler would fall asleep clutching the phone, having been promised another call the next day. My conversations with Michael were more cautious, but gradually became easier. He seemed genuinely committed to rebuilding our trust, sharing details about his daily routine, his hotel, the colleagues he was working with. He sent photos of his temporary apartment, a modest one-bedroom place near the Innovate Soft European office, and gave me access to his work calendar so I could see how he was spending his time. The transparency felt like progress after months of secrecy and deception. More importantly, Michael seemed to be rediscovering parts of himself that had gotten lost during the affair. He talked about taking long walks through Munich's historic district, about visiting museums and churches, about having time to think without the constant pressure of managing both his business and his guilt. He sounded more like the thoughtful man I'd fallen in love with in college, less like the frantic, defensive person who'd been living in our house for the past year. 3 weeks into the separation, Michael called with exciting news about a major contract Innovate Soft had secured with a consortium of German manufacturing companies. The deal was worth more than all their previous European contracts combined, and would establish them as a serious player in the international market. David Torres was ecstatic, talking about hiring additional staff and potentially opening a permanent European office. For Michael, it felt like validation that his decision to go to Germany, despite the personal cost, was benefiting everyone involved. "I wish you could see this city," Michael told me during one of our evening calls. "Munich is incredible, Emma. The architecture, the history, the way they balance tradition with innovation. I keep thinking about how much Tyler would love the museums here, how much you'd enjoy the art galleries and the Christmas markets they're already setting up for the holidays." He started talking about the possibility of our visiting for Christmas, about showing us the Germany he was discovering, about creating new family memories in this beautiful place where he was rebuilding his sense of purpose. The idea sounded romantic and healing, A chance to reclaim our relationship in a setting that wasn't contaminated by the memories of his betrayal. I found myself researching flights and hotels, imagining Tyler's excitement at experiencing his first European Christmas. My relationship with Tyler deepened during those weeks, without Michael. We started having what we called adventure nights every Friday, where we try new restaurants or explore parts of Austin we'd never visited together. Tyler revealed himself to be funnier and more insightful than I'd realized, making observations about the world that surprised me with their wisdom. He talked about missing his dad, but also seemed to enjoy having my undivided attention, something that had been rare when Michael was constantly working or stressed about the business. Lisa Chen became my closest confidant during this period, coming over several evenings a week to help with dinner and provide adult conversation after Tyler went to bed. She was cautiously optimistic about the separation, noting that I seemed happier and more confident than I'd been in months. At the same time, she warned me to be realistic about the challenges of rebuilding trust after such a significant betrayal. People can change, she told me one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. But the circumstances that led to the affair, the stress of the business, the attraction to excitement and novelty, those things don't just disappear because someone moves to another country. You need to think about what would be different if Michael came back, what safeguards you'd need to feel secure in the relationship. She was right, of course, but I wasn't ready to think that pragmatically yet. The separation was working better than I'd hoped, and Michael seemed genuinely committed to proving himself worthy of another chance. He was attending individual therapy sessions with an English-speaking counselor in Munich, reading books about rebuilding trust after infidelity, and sending me thoughtful emails about what he was learning about himself and his patterns of behavior. My mother, Carol Matthews, was less optimistic about the situation. She'd been through her own difficult divorce when I was in high school, and she worried that I was setting myself up for another betrayal. During one of our weekly Sunday dinners at her house in Lakeway, she expressed her concerns more directly than usual. "Honey, I understand the appeal of believing that people can change completely," she said as we watched Tyler play in her backyard. "But in my experience, men who cheat once tend to cheat again, especially when they face stress or temptation. Michael is in Germany with the same woman he had an affair with. Even if he's being faithful now, what happens when the business pressure increases, or when the novelty of trying to win you back wears off?" Her words stung because they echoed fears I'd been trying to suppress. Michael's emails and phone calls were wonderful, but he was still working closely with Sabrina Weber every day. He mentioned her occasionally in professional contexts, always careful to frame their interactions as purely business-related. But the fact remained that the woman who'd helped destroy our marriage was still part of his daily life. I wanted to trust that he had the strength and commitment to maintain appropriate boundaries, but trust was exactly what I was struggling to rebuild. Tyler started asking more pointed questions about when Daddy was coming home, and whether we might move to Germany to be with him. The possibility had crossed my mind more than once during our positive phone conversations. Michael's work there was going so well that David Torres was seriously considering making the European expansion permanent. If that happened, Michael would need to stay in Munich long term, and we'd have to decide whether to reunite as a family in Germany or continue living separately across an ocean. The idea of starting fresh in a new country, away from all the locations and memories associated with Michael's affair, held significant appeal. We could rebuild our marriage in a place where Sabrina Weber was just another business colleague rather than the woman who'd nearly destroyed our family. Tyler could experience a different culture, learn a new language, and have adventures that would shape his worldview in positive ways. I could potentially find marketing work with one of the many American companies expanding into European markets. But moving to Germany would also mean leaving behind my support system, my job, my mother, and everything familiar about our life in Austin. Tyler would have to adjust to a new school system, new language, and the challenge of making friends in a completely different cultural context. Most significantly, it would mean betting our entire future on Michael's ability to maintain the changes he was making while under the pressure of daily life, rather than the artificial structure of a temporary separation. 2 months into Michael's stay in Germany, he surprised me by sending a package containing Christmas ornaments from Munich's famous Christkindlmarkte. Each ornament came with a note explaining its significance and describing the market where he'd bought it. For Tyler, there was a wooden nutcracker and a story about the German tradition behind the Christmas figure. For me, there was a delicate glass star with our wedding date engraved in tiny script, along with a letter about how he thought of our marriage every time he saw the Christmas lights throughout the city. The gesture felt deeply romantic and thoughtful, evidence that Michael was truly thinking about our family, rather than just going through the motions of reconciliation. Tyler was fascinated by the ornaments and insisted we put them on our Christmas tree immediately, even though it was still only October. Every evening, he'd point out Daddy's ornaments to visitors and tell them about how his father was living in the same place where the Nutcracker stories came from. My work at TechFlow was going exceptionally well during this period. Without the distraction of marital problems, I was able to focus completely on my projects and ended up landing the largest client contract of my career. The success felt like proof that I could thrive independently, that my identity wasn't entirely defined by my role as Michael's wife. Amanda Martinez hinted that a promotion to senior marketing director might be available in the new year, which would mean significantly higher pay and more creative control over campaigns. The professional success gave me confidence that I could provide for Tyler on my own if the reconciliation with Michael didn't work out. For the first time since discovering the affair, I felt like I had genuine choices rather than just being carried along by circumstances and other people's decisions. Whether Michael and I rebuilt our marriage or decided to divorce, I knew I could create a stable, happy life for Tyler and myself. Michael's therapy sessions in Munich seemed to be producing real insights about his behavior patterns and motivations. During our phone calls, he talked openly about how he'd used the excitement of the affair to avoid dealing with stress and dissatisfaction in other areas of his life. He acknowledged that the business success, while positive, had created pressure and expectations that made him feel trapped in a version of himself that didn't feel authentic. "I think I was trying to prove something," he admitted during one particularly honest conversation. "To myself, to David, to our clients, maybe even to you. I wanted to be this successful entrepreneur, this guy who could handle international business deals and expansion opportunities. When Sabrina showed interest in me, it felt like confirmation that I was becoming the person I thought I should be. But that person wasn't actually me, and pursuing that validation cost me everything that actually mattered." His self-awareness seemed genuine and gave me hope that the changes he was making would be sustainable, rather than just temporary responses to the crisis of our separation. The man I'd married had always been reflective and emotionally intelligent. The affair had felt so out of character, precisely because it contradicted those fundamental aspects of his personality. If he could reconnect with his authentic self and develop better coping strategies for stress and temptation, maybe we really could build something stronger than what we'd had before. As we approached the 3-month mark of Michael's stay in Germany, both of us started talking more seriously about what would happen next. The European expansion was exceeding all expectations, and David Torres was pushing for Michael to stay in Munich permanently to manage their growing client base. At the same time, our marriage counselor, Dr. Morales, was encouraging us to make decisions about our future rather than continuing to exist in the limbo of indefinite separation. Michael proposed flying back to Austin for a week in December, spending time with Tyler and me without the pressure of making immediate decisions about our marriage or his work situation. The visit would be a chance to see how we interacted in person after 3 months of rebuilding our connection through phone calls and emails. If things went well, we could talk seriously about either reuniting in Austin or exploring the possibility of moving to Germany as a family. I agreed to the visit, though I insisted that Michael stay in a hotel rather than in our house. Tyler was excited beyond measure about seeing his father again, and I found myself cautiously optimistic about the prospect of spending time together, without the constant reminder of Michael's betrayal. 3 months of separation had given me perspective on what I'd lost, but also on what might be possible if we could truly start fresh. The week before Michael's planned return, I spent considerable time preparing both Tyler and myself emotionally for his visit. Tyler was so excited he could barely concentrate on schoolwork, and I found myself nervously reorganizing our entire house as if Michael were a stranger coming to visit, rather than the man who'd lived there for 8 years. Lisa helped me shop for new clothes, insisting that I should look and feel confident when Michael saw me again. "You're not the same woman he left 3 months ago," she reminded me as we browsed through stores at the Domain Shopping Center. You've proven to yourself that you can handle single parenthood, career success, and emotional healing all at the same time. Don't let him forget that when he walks back into your life. She was right. The separation had changed me in ways that went beyond just healing from the affair. I'd rediscovered my independence, my professional capabilities, and my capacity for joy that didn't depend on anyone else's behavior or approval. Whether Michael and I rebuilt our marriage or not, I was no longer the woman who would accept deception and betrayal in exchange for the comfort of familiar routine. The night before Michael's flight back to Austin, he called with a nervousness in his voice that I hadn't heard since our early dating days. He talked about how much he was looking forward to seeing Tyler and me, but also about his anxiety regarding whether the progress we'd made through phone calls would translate to real-life interactions. He'd been away long enough that our house, our neighborhood, even our daily routines would feel different to him. I know I don't have the right to expect anything, he said quietly. These 3 months have been the most difficult and educational of my life. I've learned things about myself that I wish I'd understood years ago. But more than anything, I've learned how much I love you and Tyler, how much I took our life together for granted. Whatever happens this week, I want you to know that I'm grateful you gave me this chance to try to make things right. As I hung up the phone that night, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Hope, because Michael truly seemed like he'd used the separation productively and was committed to being a better husband and father. Anxiety, because 3 months of positive phone conversations couldn't erase the fundamental breach of trust that had necessitated his departure. And uncertainty, because I still didn't know whether love and good intentions would be enough to rebuild what we'd lost. Tyler fell asleep that night, clutching the nutcracker Michael had sent from Germany, and I stayed awake for hours thinking about the woman I'd been 3 months ago, compared to who I was now. The discovery of Michael's affair had shattered my sense of security and trust, but the months of independence had rebuilt my confidence in my own strength and judgment. Tomorrow, Michael would walk back into our lives, and we'd begin to discover whether the people we'd become during our separation could find their way back to each other. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.